Vodka on the side, and typically with ghee, hang, um, green chilies, cumin seeds, a lot of ghee, and then dump it in, and that's it. So it's pretty quick. All in all, under an hour can make dal.
And where was the first time you had this dal? If you can recall, or how you learned making this.
First time I probably had this style dal. This isn't necessarily I didn't get it from anywhere, but I had a uncle or fake uncle in the Desi parlance that he was a really good cook, and he would always make vegetarian food, and he would make dal, and it was awesome. So I asked him one time, I was like, hey, what are some of your tricks in terms of making this? And he kind of gave me a little bit of the magic, and then I kind of improvised from there. But maybe maybe 7 years ago, probably started making this style dal. Mm-hmm. So,
and what's your go-to method for recipes? Is this something that you've learned while watching someone in your family cook, and that you try to recall those methods and cook by that, or is it YouTube? Or so how are you getting your recipes? Is like in that's what my question is.
I think probably starting as a little kid, I would always mill around my mom cooking. So I would bother her, and then she would, oh, I want to stir the dal, or I want to stir the meat, or make the last roti, or whatever. So I'd always be around. So I always kind of picked up things from her. And I think when I moved out, I always liked Desi food. So it's there's no place to all the Desi restaurants do a travesty for the Desi food. So the only place to eat is to make it yourself.
Yeah.
So, and the closest way to, the only way to kind of get decent at it is to practice. So I think, looking and seeing what my mom does, and then kind of seeing how other people, in terms of the flavor profile of some of the food that gets made, whether it's dal or whether it's subsies, and just kind of testing and kind of practicing, and then also just kind of using intuition and just technique and guesswork to kind of get it to the right taste that I like. So I think there isn't a real recipe per se. I think generally to make stuff, whether it's a dal or whether it's a subsi or whether it's chicken, there's a basic kind of starting point. And then from there, it's kind of add, subtract, and kind of what taste you want to get to basically kind of modify incrementally until you get to it based on the spices that you have and kind of the other things, whether it's temperature or timing, to get to that point.
Right. So if I got this right, you're still using more of your memory to cook these things as opposed to using a cookbook. Or a recipe book, or YouTube. It's still those associations that you have in your head.
It's still those general associations with how we grew up and what goes into the food. But then it's also kind of seeing how other people cook, right? If you cook with somebody else and they do it with a little bit of a different technique, just take that and incorporate it, and maybe apply it to some other thing that kind of makes sense in a different application. So it's almost like learning by osmosis, I guess. Whatever's kind of in the atmosphere, just pick it up and then see if it works. So it's and then it's also just kind of doing it on the fly, right? If you have extra tamarind chutney that you have, maybe throw it in, into some sauce to give it a little tangy and flavor that you wouldn't otherwise get just through putting spices in. So
interesting. And so one last question. What are your thoughts about the scale of the globalization of our food systems? Food has always been globalized. There has been trade going on for centuries. But I feel that the scale in which it's happening now, what do you think that how that's changing our food and by extension of that, how it's changing us?
I think the globalization and kind of the scale of food production has changed how we eat, because before we used to eat seasonally. So what are seasonal vegetables that say we would eat in winter or summer, whether it's carrots or spinach or strawberries or whatever, we don't necessarily have context in terms of what is seasonal and what isn't seasonal, because frankly I don't know what's seasonal. I just know I can go to the grocery store and get whatever. So how we interact with food is very different than, say, our ancestors or grandparents, because they would eat their food according to the seasons and use food in certain time periods because it was perishable, and also it just becomes unavailable. Whereas now we don't think about perishability because we have cold storage, we have things get picked up ripe, not even ripe, and shipped across the ocean, and they will be sprayed with chemical ripeners essentially to make something, a tomato red or whatever. So it's very different in terms of how globalization has impacted the food systems that we have. And I think it also kind of removes us from the process of actually understanding what food is and how kind of basic it is. We've kind of, I would say, and this is one thing about kind of cooking and knowing how to cook. It's, you see the ingredients and it's not something abstract. It's not something that you just pick up from the grocery store and heat in the microwave and that's it and you have something to eat. It's actually, you're starting with something very basic like a dal, and you are putting in the pieces and making something nutritious and also healthy and also tasty and wonderful that you didn't have when you started. And it's also something that is pretty environmentally sustainable in the sense you just have your dal and that's it. You don't have cardboard, you don't have boxes, you don't have plastic, you don't have anything. So I think the way food has changed is that it's layered many elements on, many negative elements on kind of a very basic and simple thing. So globalization has its pluses, but there are some minuses in terms of, the impact, on the environment and on us as people.
Thank you.
You have a question?
No.